Hey folks, I'm back. It's been a while since I made a video. I've been doing a lot of writing the last couple weeks and been really trying to push and finish my book before the end of December, so I just haven't really prioritized making videos. But I have been posting a little bit over on my Instagram, so if you're curious, you can go check me out over on MJ Johnson Books on Instagram. Today, I have a review for The White Shadows, a short story by author E.M. Peck, who I recently got acquainted with on Instagram. He's a really cool guy. And before I even dive into the story, I want to just talk about the awesome kind of marketing that I think he's done with this story. He's not releasing it like a story to purchase or even a story to access on his website. You have to message him about it, which, on the surface, you might say, like, that doesn't sound like good marketing at all. But it really helps you connect with the story because when he sends it to you, he has this personal note that almost makes him, the author, a character in this kind of horror world that he has built. And he mentions that, like, he heard about this story from a colleague and there's a lot of mystery surrounding it, and he wants you to check it out and see what you think. And then, even before the story begins, there's a personalized note for each individual recipient of the story. Mine was shadows in the dark sky, white against the blackened trees. Stop listening. Latcher is dead, or bones of boys sacrificed upon stone. From Ned L.V. Recheck. It's cool. It's just a couple little lines, not even more than 2 full sentences, really. And it gets you curious about what's going on. And each person who gets a copy of the story has their own personalized note. So that if you talk to your friends, you talk to other people who have read the book, each person's got a different piece of the puzzle. And if you want to discuss, you can maybe get a little bit more hint as to what's going on. I think it's a great idea. It's not something that is going to help him reach a broad audience, but what it is going to do is it's going to make each individual reader be that much more engaged in the story. And so it's not necessarily marketing in the traditional sense, but it's building a stronger connection with his readers. And I think that is more important, especially for, smaller authors, than to just, spray and pray and try to reach every single possible person. But beyond all the mystery surrounding the story, let's dive into the white shadows themselves. I have to say, right off the bat, it was an amazing first paragraph. One of the best first paragraphs I've read from any story this whole year. It depicts a man standing in a room, his phone ringing, and he's staring into the dying embers of a once burning fire. And the way he conveys subtext between the lines is really exceptional, and it told me that right off the bat this was going to be a really, really well written story. So, in a very brief and hopefully not too spoilery summary of the story, it's about a family who's on Christmas vacation. They're up on a cabin. I think it's in upstate New York, but they're basically in the middle of the woods. The father, Terrell, is the main character. His wife, Shannon, and their quite young son, he's got to be like 4 or something, Jason. So Terrell, Shannon, Jason, and then Terrell's father is there at the beginning of the story, and his name is James. And so the grandfather tells Jason this scary story about these monsters in the woods called the White Shadows. Then grandfather goes back home. The middle of the night, Jason is saying, "I can hear the white shadows calling to me, Daddy." And Terrell finds Jason doing some sleepwalking in the middle of the night. He brings him back inside, deadlocks the door, goes to sleep on the couch, and he wakes up in the dead of night. The door is open, sun is gone, and he finds his son's remains in the forest. And it is ruled by law enforcement as a mountain lion attack, but he knows the truth. He knows that it was this supernatural creature from the stories. And so it drives him insane. He wants to get revenge. His wife leaves him. After a couple years, he determines he shouldn't let this ruin his life, and that he should still honor his son by living his life to the fullest. But once a week, every year, he will go back to the woods. And 9 years later, he goes back to the woods, and he too is killed by the monster. And there's a lot more to it than that, and it's very creepy, and I definitely recommend you watch it. But that's the general gist of what happens. And I think for me, the highlight of the story was, it's funny to say, but the highlights were the beginning, the middle, and the end. Because, like I said, I love the first paragraph, and then the middle where the son is kind of being lured out into the forest it's not creepy in like a chilling way, but it's very discomforting. I don't have kids myself, but I imagine that it evoked the feeling in me that I imagine parents have when they're like in a crowded place like a shopping mall or a festival or something, and they turn around and then they turn back and their kid is nowhere to be seen. And it's like they probably have in the back of their mind like something telling them like, it's going to be fine, you're going to find him, don't panic. But there's got to be like that split second of utter sheer terror that you've lost your kid for good. And it really evoked that feeling for me. And because I know that I'm reading a horror story, I know it's not going to end well, probably. And I know that everything the father is doing is not going to be enough to save his son, even though he's taking what normally would be considered very understandable precautions. And it really just, that sense of dread that something bad was going to happen was quite strong in the middle of the story. So I really respect Peck for being able to convey that in, a short story. And then I also liked the end of the story. I liked the narrative structure that because the story is kind of like hopping back and forth in time. You start in the future and then you kind of have this flashback to when the sun disappears, and you jump forward a little bit more, and eventually you end again at the same time frame that you started the story with. So there's not really much in story time between the first couple paragraphs and the last couple paragraphs. And I really like that. And I think it kind of created a cohesive feel to the story. And it gave me a lot of respect for E.M. Peck, because I've never read his stuff before. I've read other stuff from other people who I've talked to online, and often it's good. But going into it completely blind, my expectations were average, I would say, and he certainly succeeded them. He feels like a long-time published author who really knows what he's doing with really tight, clean, compelling prose. So personally, what I would have done, and what I think would have made the end hit even harder, would be if Shannon actually had stayed with him. If she expressed that she didn't believe that this monster killed their son, but she loves her husband and she wants to support him. And in the story, Jason does eventually, get better after a year or two, and kind of starts to live his life again, and just takes a week every year to go searching for this monster on the anniversary of their son's death. And I think making Shannon stay with him and be extra supportive and extra loving, it would have made Terrell's death at the end be even more tragic, because then it's not just him dying after losing everything, it's him dying and his wife losing everything, seemingly to the same tragic mountain lion attack. So, that was my only one, little, it's not a criticism. I think the story is still great the way it is. But that's just the one thing I would have changed if I was the one writing it. But I think the way E.M. Peck is able to evoke strong feelings of discomfort and dread, it's really indicative of a great horror author. And I haven't read much horror, but reading this story made me want to check out more stories from the genre to be able to incorporate more of that ability into my own writing. So great job, E.M. Peck. The White Shadows was awesome. If you are interested in reading it, shoot the guy a message. He's on Instagram at EMPeck. And thank you for watching, everybody. Stay flaming.